I'm Kent Sharp, President CEO of SE Group, and I'm here with my good friend and business partner, Chris Cushing, to have a great conversation around the legacy of mountain planning and Chris's 40 years of doing mountain planning all over the world.
Yeah, thanks, Kent. Chris Cushing. I'm a mountain planner here at SE Group. Been with the company since 1985, and it's been a great run, and it's been just a joy working with everyone, including Kent, who we've been together for almost 30 years. It's been a great run, and look forward to chatting about some of the fun stories we've had.
Yeah, we've had some amazing times together, Chris. Traveled all over the world together, which has been just an unbelievable career and lifetime for both of us. You know, Chris, when I think about my image of the origins of the company, and, you know, we talk interchangeably, Snow Engineering, SE Group. We've been SE Group now for 25 years, but for a lot of folks, it's still Snow E. You know, I think about your father really as being the patriarch, and there when Sel Hanna originally founded the company, but Joe was absolutely right there with Sel every step of the way.
Yeah.
What are your earliest memories of that? I've got my image of what that looks like, but I know you've actually got the real story.
It was some colorful times. You know, this company actually started in Boston. A group of engineers started the company down in Boston, and primarily looking at engineering work for ski resorts. And they brought on this guy Sel Hanna, who had been in the Olympics ski jumping, and had been doing some kind of trail design for the resorts in northern New Hampshire over the years. And the engineers hired Sel to kind of transition the company into the more the planning versus the engineering aspect of things. And eventually, the engineering part didn't really, take. And so Sel ultimately kind of acquired the company from these engineers and moved the company up to northern New Hampshire, Franconia, which is where I grew up, and started the business in the farmhouse across the river from where I grew up. And so, my dad was actually, he got a job with Sel working on his farm. That's how he first met Sel, was working on his farm.
And they were potato farmers, right?
Potato farmers, yeah. Growing potatoes and cutting hay and corn and everything else. And so, long story, but Sel brought my dad into the company. He recognized that my dad had a knack for getting around in the woods and kind of understanding things. And that was in like 1962, which was when I was 2 years old. But my first, my earliest memories, Sel and my dad, we're not only business partners, but also very good friends, and, literally lived across the river from each other. And Sel would come over, and, there would frequently be bourbon involved. So some really great fun times seeing them interact. But that was kind of, that kind of established a lot of the culture of our company. Is that camaraderie and it's as much a social partnership as a business partnership. And over those, early 60s into the 70s were some crazy times, and there's some really interesting characters that were involved with the company, and just through default, they would end up at our house for a dinner party or cocktails or what have you. And so it was really, really entertaining as a young child to see that type of, business. Of course, at that point, I had no idea, I figured out, I guess this is normal. But it was really a really fun group of people that like to have fun, but they were really good at what they did, and they did great work. And so that, again, I think that was kind of a lot of the foundation of where we are today. And, the relationship you and I have is kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when we think about you being born into this business, into this industry, it's literal. It really is. You were there as a small child, and I know I've heard you tell stories about your first job was emptying the waste baskets in the office, which is just great. You're probably 5 or 6 years old at that time. I think about And I started skiing in the 60s like you did as well. Leather lace-up boots and skis that literally had the edges tacked on with small brads.
Screws, yeah.
Or screws, yeah, exactly. Crazy. Skiing in the 60s was probably like base jumping is now. I mean, it was considered a super high adventure, super dangerous. You know, I mean, if you were living in a city and you went back to your office on a Monday and you said, I went skiing this weekend, people literally would act like you came home or you came back that day and you said, I went base jumping this weekend. And like, wow, are you kidding me? I mean, it was a risky sport back in those days, right? And it was very high adventure.
Yeah.
And I think it was that high adventure that really shaped the industry throughout the 60s and then slowly into the 70s. And we think in the 60s, I mean, there really weren't that many resorts.
Right. Yeah.
Not that many. You know, Aspen was around in Colorado and A Basin was around in those days, and then a lot of the ones in New England. Where do you think skiing really in the United States took hold most quickly? Was it in New England more than in the West?
Well, I think in New England, there was a really big racing community that, and you know, the earliest trails that were built by my dad and Sel, they were race trails. And you know, on Cannon Mountain, the Taft Trail was built for racing, and the Thunderbolt Trail down in Massachusetts, which actually that's where my dad used to race when he was a kid. But that was, you know, that's what kind of established it in the racing clubs, you know, for kids as well as racing leagues. That really perpetuated a lot of the growth in New England. You know, I think out west it was more, you know, the recreation side of things that were driving it. You know, I mean, obviously at Aspen there was racing involved and a lot of history there. But I think the growth there in the West was really, you know, driven more by the recreational aspect. And, you know, obviously the weather's way better and the snow's better and everything else. And so these races, you know, the 10th Mountain Division was really largely responsible for a lot of the development in particularly in Colorado, Vail and others. And you know, those 10th Mountain Division folks grew up racing in the East. They went to war and learned the sport and they realized that, geez, you know, a lot of their training was at Camp Hale and Leadville, and you know, they recognized the opportunity to get more people out there and get skiing, and I think that's kind of what spurred it on.
Yeah, I think you're right. The post-World War II sort of experience that a lot of the 10th Mountain Division guys had in Europe, and they'd seen skiing in Europe, and they came back, and you know, we think about those time periods, and people didn't travel internationally a lot. People didn't just pop over to Europe because it was really hard to do in the 50s and the 40s, you know, for sure. They came back, they're like, wow, we could have skiing here too. A lot of the passion for the sport definitely was born from those experiences.
Yeah.
And they brought that back with them. Yeah. So you get out of UVM, engineering degree, and you first went to work for the company as a snowmaking engineer. And snowmaking in the 85, when you started, was really just kind of starting to get going. I mean, there was small systems and not very widespread, but not in widespread use by any means. Yeah. What did that look like in those days?
Yeah, you know, and so I when I started with snow engineering, it was with working for Scott Barthold, who was the snowmaking engineer back then. And, you know, in his words, you know, prior to that time frame, the early 80s, snowmaking systems were just like big plumbing installations. They were very, very rudimentary. And right in the mid 80s is when, you know, technology really started to kick in, new types of snow guns and you know, valving, automatic valving for pressure and all these things were happening. And it's when, you know, the efficiencies of the system really started becoming a lot more important. And so that's a lot of what we were looking at is ways of, you know, regulating the systems better and using water more efficiently and getting more snow on the ground quicker and all those types of things. It was fascinating. It was, you know, as far as getting a civil engineering degree, you know, that was a vocation that, you know, isn't all that common. And so it was really fun to kind of transition what I learned in college into, you know, designing snowmaking systems. So it was fun. But I always, my goal was always to get into the mountain planning thing, so that was.
How did that transition go? So, and I don't think I even know the history of that. You were working with Scott, who's actually still one of the preeminent engineers in snowmaking today, even though he's in his 70s at this point. You were working with Scott on the snowmaking side. When did you actually move over into the mountain design side? And what were some of the first projects you remember like being engaged with?
So what happened was Tim Beck, who at the time was a mountain planner for snow engineering. He wasn't yet the leader of the company, which he became later. But he, in 87, he took kind of like a sabbatical. He got into real estate development. So he left the company for this other endeavor. And so there kind of an opening arose to help my dad out. My dad was still doing the work, and other guys like Ford Hubbard and some others. But there was, this void came about, and, I was like, can I do that? And so, I had, my dad knew that I was, really interested in that. I'd been on site visits with him when I was a kid, and like you were saying, we'd run around in the office and draw maps and, stuff like that. So, he recognized, and everyone in the company, Jim Branch, the president back then, he recognized that there was, a desire on my part to get into that. And I think my dad validated the fact that I had, could probably hold my own doing that. And so that's what happened. So most of the early projects were in New England. The first ski trail I ever designed, on the map, drawing out the trail and figuring out how wide it should be and where it should go and stuff like that. And then, actually laying it out on the ground. And
do you remember which trail that was?
Yeah. It was 2 miles home at Bretton Woods. It's obviously still there, and I've skied it. It was great. But yeah, that was, most of the early work was in New England. And then, shortly thereafter, we decided to open an office in Colorado, and I moved out to Frisco in 93, and then, so a lot more work out west then.
Yeah, I think you and I met in about probably 94 or so when you were working on master plans there in the Summit County area. Mm-hmm. And I was the winter sports person for the Forest Service. Yeah. And I don't know if you know this story, but the first time I ever met your dad and Tim Beck, Keystone was doing the Outback expansion. And they had hired snow engineering to come in and do all the trail layout on the Outback. South Peak was originally called. And I was the guy in green that was, although I never wore the uniform, be clear about that, who was there to, oversee the construction and the implementation. And Keystone had brought in a helicopter for the day, and we were doing trail layout. And I literally, my first meeting with Tim and Joe was helping them tie flags in trees. Yeah. And that's we were laying that stuff out, and they knew what they were doing. And I was, in theory, approving the sidelines as we went. And then the cutting started literally like the next day. Yeah. And I remember vividly an afternoon thunderstorm came in. And I don't know if any of us had rain gear. I just remember like coming down and just being absolute drowned rats. We were all just absolutely soaked to the skin that afternoon after we got that layout done.
Part of the game.
It's part of being in the mountains. Yeah. You touch on a piece, Chris, and I've known you for a long, long time, and I know that your passion and for you, the ultimate on what we do and what you do comes in the thrill of skiing that trail. And you just touched on it a minute ago at Bretton Woods. You still ski that trail. And it all culminates for you when you actually ski that trail and you get to have that experience. You see somebody else skiing that trail and you're like, that just skis great.
Yeah. You're always critical of your own work. So, it's like, but yeah, no, it's really, really fun. And recently at Deer Valley East Village, they opened and had the opportunity to, ride the first lift of this trail, this lift that we've been planning for, 10 years and skiing the runs and stuff. And it's really, really exhilarating, but what's really, really fun and And again, up at Deer Valley, we were taking the first run down, and there were some kids skiing with their dad, and they were coming down to the lift. We were all coming down to the lift together, and the kids were laughing, and that was so much fun, and that was just like, talk about goosebumps. It was really cool. And that's what it's all about, right? Is doing things that, can help people enjoy the outdoors, enjoy skiing, and
that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And a while back we figured out that obviously our clients are the ski resorts themselves, but their clients are the customers.
Right.
So ultimately our work is for those customers, for those skiers. Yeah. And that's exactly why we do what we do.
Yeah. And, there's other, it's got to be efficient and there's all the other factors that come to play, but that's the ultimate kind of driver is making people have fun.
So as I always joke around and say we're snow engineers because that's kind of what we do. I always get the question like, what's your favorite place to ski? But I'm going to drill a little deeper to that. If you think about all the trails you've designed around the world, do you have one that sticks out in your mind as like, that's probably my favorite one to just arc huge turns on, like just embodies that experience for you?
Wow. I think that, I would, is probably this run up at Revelstoke called Devil's Club. And it starts at the top of the highest lift and it ends at the bottom. So it's 5,600 vertical feet of nonstop fall line. And it's got some steep pitches. It's got some rolls in it. And it's really, really fun. But that's a tough question. I mean,
that's a really
it kind of depends. I mean, there's all kinds of different factors, right? But I think that one sort of stands out as being kind of there aren't many trails like that 5,600 vertical feet of like, and you stand at the top and you look down, it's like, oh my God, we got to go all the way down there. It's all one run,
So Chris, I think about like a lot of the work that you've done in your career, and it starts from crazy exploration, flying around in a helicopter all over northern Turkey, basically just looking for a mountain because they want to build a skier and they want to know even where to start, all the way down to, we're already working at a specific skier and they want to make one improvement. It's a huge wide range. When you think about some of the places that you have explored around the world, looking for that next mountain, that new resort, what comes to mind for you for just like, wow, this is a really cool space and this would be a great place to put a mountain and something you've worked on there?
They all, Japan, some of the projects in Japan really kind of embodied a lot of the characteristics that can make for a great resort. And some of the projects, one of these projects we worked on over there, unfortunately never got built. But it's in Niseko, which is kind of the capital, as you know, the capital of skiing in Japan. It's kind of the place to go. And it was just this awesome mountain. And, then they get tons of snow and it had a really good distribution of, there's a lot of beginner terrain, a lot of intermediate terrain, a lot of expert terrain, a lot of terrain above tree line. It's just all the kind of the things that you look for. And the reason it ultimately didn't go anywhere is because the top of the mountain was above tree line. It was protected environmentally. And so it never went anywhere. But as far as, Revelstoke is really an amazing mountain. And again, they get good snow. It's got amazing vertical and they've got some really great off-piste terrain. And I think, have you been up?
I haven't been to
Revelstoke. Yeah, it's really fun and it's a really cool town but it's remote and that's, its only challenge is it's tough to get people up there. And that's one of the things that when we were doing the design there, it was one of the more difficult projects we had to work on because, we knew that they were never going to get, a million skier visits or anything like that. but it's this huge mountain. It's, thousands of acres and 6,000 vertical feet. And so it's like, well, so how do we lift serve this mountain with as few lifts as possible, but, accessing as much terrain as possible? And that was a real challenge. But today there's 5 lifts that are serving over 3,000 acres. And it's like, I think that's
pretty efficient.
Yeah.
Super efficient. I was thinking about some different stories last night and some of the adventures you and I've had, and thinking about flying around in helicopters. There's a time when we were in eastern Turkey, and I had sent a very simple email to our client representative over there. We're preparing for the site visit, and I said, "Do you think it'd be possible to get a helicopter to survey some of the terrain?" And I got back a real quick reply, "Yes, no problem." And we got over there, and what we didn't understand was the only helicopters in eastern Turkey were military gunships. And they drove us out to this, I think it was an army base at first. Yeah. And they shuttled us all into this tea house, and we sat there and we drank tea for literally hours, 2 or 3, 4 hours. And what we found out was that they were trying to get permission for 2 American civilians to board and fly around on a military gunship in Turkey. Yeah. And they couldn't get the permission, and the base commander would not allow it. Yeah. And so we got in the vehicles, and they drove us across town or across the region somewhere to an Air Force base or something. And apparently that commander had said, "Yeah, okay, it's fine. We can do this." But I've got this vision, and I think maybe somewhere I've still got a picture of you sitting in a Turkish military Black Hawk helicopter with a fully locked and loaded 50 caliber machine gun behind your head.
Fact.
Little did I know by sending this email, "Can we get a helicopter?" I did not know that was going to happen.
No, that was a mind blower. We got into the ship and it was a big bench, and I was asked to get in first, so I had the window seat, and so I got in, and I scooched myself over on the bench, and I turned around like this to look up front, and literally there was a machine gun barrel right there. I almost put my nose in the end of the machine gun barrel.
See if I can find that picture.
Trip. Yeah. Yeah.
We had some crazy times in Turkey, and the project we did in Azerbaijan was equally crazy to build the resort over there
for a prince.
Yeah, for the what was that guy? The Minister of Tourism.
Yeah. And I guess the prince had his house right there, or his
the president. It was the president of Azerbaijan had built his summer compound right there at the bottom of the mountain.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at that terrain. We were flying around in an old Russian, like a 1950s or 60s Russian military Sikorsky. Mm-hmm. And I remember this thing, if it had been a boat, you wouldn't have gone to sea in the thing, right? I mean, it was like clunk, 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 terrifying helicopter. And I remember telling the minister, the terrain here is just too steep. It's the South Caucasus Mountains, and they're just wicked steep. Mm. And they had already built the hotel. The president already has his compound there. And they said, "We're going to build a ski area here with or without you. So help us figure it out." And we did, and they ultimately built it. Yeah. That's one of those projects that, we get to be there on the front end, and be a lot to try to get all the way back to Azerbaijan to actually go ski the thing. But I've seen some videos, and, they've still got a website.
It's not a place that I'd put on my list as a ski destination.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then the Jeep ride we had where we almost went off a cliff.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because it was like 3 or 4 inches of new snow.
Yeah, well, it was snow-packed, and these guys, they had never driven in snow before. We're going up this hill, and they start spinning, and so the guy just guns it, which makes it spin even more, and we start sliding back down the hill, and I know that there's a corner below us, and we're going towards that corner, and if we fly off that corner,
it was a long ways down.
It would not have been a good deal. And I think I was in the back seat and you were in the front seat. And I was literally opening my door to bail out. And you had the smarts to put on the emergency brake. So that stopped the wheels from spinning. And we went into the snowbank, and fortunately didn't go through the snowbank because we probably wouldn't be here if that was the case.
I remember that. The guy driving had absolutely no idea what he was doing.
Yeah.
And I reached down and just pulled that e-brake. And I remember you had I can't remember if you'd actually already bailed or you were like on your way out the door.
I was on my way out the door.
and then remember he didn't go off the edge, but he went down. He slammed into the other vehicle behind us, and both the vehicles were wrecked. Yeah. And we were heading up to see the site. I think you and I got out and said, "We'll walk from here. We're good."
Oh my gosh, yeah, fun times. We've had some.
Oh my gosh,
epic trips together,
crazy
man.
memories. So, Chris, we talk a lot about mountain planning, and obviously over the years we've had many folks come into the company and learn mountain planning. It's a fine craft and a fine art and some science all blended in pretty well. When you think about both your career, your trajectory, how you learned the fine finesse of mountain planning, mountain design, and what it takes to be a good mountain planner, and how you've kind of coached some of the folks that are on our team now. They're a fantastic team of mountain planners that we've got. A lot of that is absolutely to your credit for mentoring those folks that have that have and will follow in your footsteps and my footsteps.
Yeah, it's really interesting that the kind of the cross section of people that that have come on to join the company, and their background and kind of what put them in a position where they could become good mountain planners. I mean, we've worked with landscape architects and specialist environmental studies and engineers and so forth. And it, well, obviously it helps if you're a skier. That's
kind of a prerequisite.
Very important aspect of it. But there's other aspects to it as well, as being able to find your way around in the mountains and when I was a kid, did a lot of hiking and stuff, and I did a outward bound program where we had to navigate through the forest, just to get to from point A to point B, and so that kind of background is really important, is having that understanding of terrain and how topo maps represent what the terrain actually is, and having a kind of a creative outlook on things, and so it's really a combination of those kind of technical skills of whether it's engineering or landscape architecture or environmental conditions, with a passion. You really do have to be passionate about skiing and understand kind of what makes good ski terrain, and then the kind of the creativity to it, and it's generally ski racers don't necessarily make good mountain planners because they design trails that are fun to race on, but they're not necessarily that much fun for the general public to ski on. Now we found that Dave Chudowski, who is with us now, as you know, was
two-time Olympian.
He was in the Olympics twice, but he has little kids, and so he takes his little kids skiing, and he understands that in order for him to have fun, his kids have to have fun, and so I think that's what we've been trying to instill in the folks that we've hired to do mountain planning. And in some cases it's worked and some it hasn't. Some people get it, some people don't get it, or just aren't, for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. It's really, and the other part of it is helping our folks understand the importance of, listening to our clients and understanding what they're trying to create, asking the right questions, listening to the response, kind of facilitating a dialogue of like, okay, what is it? What is your vision? What do you want to create? And so, it's just a broad spectrum of capabilities that it's really hard, as it's really hard to hire for, because it's not like people have a degree in mountain planning or whatever. So a lot of it is trying to find people, and I'm not, this better than I do, finding people who, fit well and have, the basic understanding, and then helping them to kind of understand our values and culture and things, and as far as corporate as well as what we try to create for ski resorts. And so it's kind of a not a very definitive curriculum, but we're working on that now. But yeah, it's just a combination of a bunch of things that.
Well, the thing that's so hard to capture in words is the passion. I think of it as like that fire in your belly. It's in your blood. Skiing is either in your blood or it's not. And for folks that skiing's not in their blood, they kind of don't get how passionate and how dedicated and I'm going to just go ahead and say ridiculously addicted that skiers are to skiing. And you exhibit all forms of like adult addiction when it comes to powder skiing. You have anxiety around it and you kind of live for it. And it seems a little ridiculous when you hear me say that, but it's kind of the real deal.
Yeah,
it's in your blood.
It's true. It's absolutely a big part of it is having that passion and drive for better skiing.
Well, and I think about, the trip that you and I took to American Samoa and how mountain design really translates in not necessarily just to skiing, but we're looking at an aerial tram system above the port of Pongo Pongo on the extinct volcano in the jungle. It was a really, really cool time to be there. But all of those skills translate directly over to what we were doing there, siting the terminals, where the mazing and the milling was going to be, what we're going to do at the top of the tramway. Yeah. That was an amazing project rather.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's such a broad, the different things that we encounter. That's a perfect example of like who in the world would have ever thought that a guy who spent his career doing mountain planning would be designing an aerial tramway in the South Pacific. It's like, really? But yeah, it's just part of the fascination of this whole thing.
So, Chris, as you've traveled to so many resorts, we were making a list the other day from the best of our recollection. I think we totaled several hundred resorts that you've been involved with. What's the commonality between those? What makes a great resort or a great client, a great operator at a resort? If we think about the common threads that are present in some of the best resorts.
Yeah. Good question. Tough one. I think that the general commonality is you've got a guy or a group or whatever that has a vision to create, a ski resort. And there's barriers to that, whether it's environmental or economic or environmental. Did I say that already? Yeah. Market, I guess would be the third. There's just barriers that have to be overcome, and I can't think of a project where that hasn't been the case, where, a group or individual wants to build a ski resort and kind of the first thing they encounter is, okay, the first barrier is this, and okay, we get that one, we get beyond that one, and then the next one. And so I think that's, one commonality is that, it's challenging. It's really challenging to create. The resorts that we've been involved with, from the ground up, it's taken decades for them to actually happen, from the day we started planning to the day that they actually opened for operation is decades. And that's why, is because every step of the way, it's like, okay, we got to find the site. Okay, we get that one taken care of. Okay, now we got to figure out how it's going to work. Okay, there's just a whole sequence of barriers. I can't think of a better term of that need to be overcome. And I guess that's the reason that it's so rewarding once it does finally happen. Is it's like, man, all these things that we encountered. It's like 3-dimensional chess. you know, there's just so much to consider. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I can't think of a better example of that than Tamarack, Idaho. And, you know, we as a company and you personally were involved in like 4 iterations of that for 4 different owners of that
Right.
project before it finally got built.
Yeah.
And then we were actually involved in all the construction. You were there on site for much of the construction.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it took how many years? Decades?
Yeah. I think we started working on that. I started working on it, you know, it was the early 90s, 91, maybe the late 80s. I think it was the early 90s. And I think it opened in 04. So, you know, that's 15 years.
Yeah.
And same thing at Revelstoke. That, you know, we started on that, and I think I'm pretty sure it was 92 there. They opened in 2007, and yeah, it's and some of them never, you know, Garibaldi up in British Columbia. We've been working on that for a couple of decades, and they're still working on it. Those barriers are still out there.
I think about going back to that passion, you know, that fire in the belly around skiing, and some of the founders of this industry and the folks that actually were the originators of many of the resorts. I think you could easily characterize them as having more passion than common sense, perhaps, or certainly they weren't constrained by reality.
Yeah.
They just had that undying passion and would stop at nothing to finally get it done. And I think back about some of those people, and thank God for them, because I don't think that the ski industry in the United States would exist like it does if you hadn't had that group of people that were just totally addicted and dedicated to the sport of skiing.
Yeah, so
People
much
like
so
Chuck
that
Lewis come to mind.
yeah,
you know?
yeah. Dick Bass. I mean, you know, and for some of it almost broke them.
Oh yeah,
Dick
for
Bass.
sure.
I mean, you know, he was so passionate. It's almost like the level of passion is directly or indirectly proportional to how much money they throw at the thing, or I guess it's directly proportional. Yeah, and you know, without the Dick Basses and the Chuck Lewises and the Pete Seiberts and, you know, you name them, you know, we wouldn't have Snowbird, we wouldn't have Copper, we wouldn't have Vail, you know, and those guys just, they, you know, I think saw those barriers as like challenges, and they were so passionate. It was like, there's no challenge that's too big, and they made it happen.
I was having a conversation with James Coleman at Mountain Capital Partners here not long ago, and you know, James still embodies that passion. For him, it is absolutely all about skiing. All about skiing. And fortunately, he's got a great team that sort of manages the business side of things for him. But boy, is he the visionary that's driven by that passion. And you don't see that in a lot of folks anymore.
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, I mean, you know, there's just obviously the passion is still out there, but to the level that James takes it, it's really, really fun to see.
So, Chris, when you look back at your now 4 decades in this business and creating some great resorts all over the world, what's a piece of advice you would give to one of our young mountain designers that you wish you would have realized maybe 10 years into your career instead of 30 or 40 years into your career?
Yeah. Listen.
Ask good questions and listen.
Ask good questions and listen. You know, yeah. You know, we have all our methodologies and formulas and approaches to doing things, but we never have the full answer. You know, the operations folks, the resorts, you know, they know their mountains better than we do, and you know, it's important to get that input, and you know, it's sort of a common thing to think you have all the answers and that you know you're an expert, so you have the right solution. But there's always, you know, another aspect or outlook to it, and you know, so that's for me. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and you know, we sort of loosely say it's like our bedside manner of how we come into a project and work with resorts, but to recognize that the men and women who run that mountain every single day of the winter, you know, 9, 10, 12 hours a day, they know what works. They know what doesn't work. They know where the wheels come off, and they've got great ideas. And yeah, coming in and not saying, okay, we're going to tell you guys how to fix this place or what to do next, to just facilitate a great dialogue with them and try to bring those ideas out from them and then help them coalesce that. One of the things I think about, Chris, when I think back at your career and some of the different places we've been, and I think it's your superpower, where I've seen you step into a situation with a resort team where they've been struggling with, maybe it's a lift placement or, where to put a new beginner lift or something. And they've just walked it and staked it, and they've been all on the ground for, a couple of summers trying to figure it out. And I've seen you many, many times what I call pull the magic planning hat out, or rabbit out of the hat, where you'll walk in and you'll be like, do you ever think about putting it here? And they're just like, oh my gosh, yes, that's perfect. No, we didn't think about that. Why didn't we see that? But I think it is that outside perspective, not just those fresh eyes, and obviously the experience that comes behind that.
Right.
But I've been there when you've done that many times, and it's always just such a cool thing to see.
Yeah. Well, experience is good. And again, the only way you can get really good experience is to let others influence how you think about things. And that's, part of this whole listening thing is other people have good ideas and other, different approaches at looking at things. It's like, if you get sort of tunnel vision about things, you might lose an opportunity, and to hear other people's ideas and like, oh, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And, then you learn that and it allows you to kind of come up with some ideas that, maybe people hadn't thought about yet. So,
gathering perspective is one of the most precious commodities in our lives, right?
Right.
The deeper your perspective is, the better.
Yeah. And, the stuff that I've learned from you specifically, is immeasurable. I mean, like you say, we've been working together for 20, 30 years, whatever. And your insights, initially, obviously you ran our environmental practice and that's such a huge part of what we do today with mountain resorts and your approach and again, that collaboration that you brought to those projects early on with, whether it was the Forest Service or the public, that's one of those things that really influenced me is that collaboration, the importance of collaboration. So that's good stuff.
Yeah. I think one of the rare privileges that I've had to spend time on the field with you is laying out trails and to watch you sort of doing what you do. And I characterize it as you're the artist, and it's kind of hysterical because flagging tape, survey tape is your medium. That's how you paint your picture on the mountain. You sculpt it or design it or shape it.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of experiences where you'll be laying something out and you get down a couple hundred yards and you run into a huge rock outcrop. We have to hike back up the hill and pull all the flags we just laid out for the last 200 yards and swing it right or swing it left to avoid the rock outcrop we ran into.
Yeah, it's become a lot easier. There's the mapping that's available today. This LiDAR mapping is just so ridiculously accurate, and with GPS units, it's really changed things a lot. Made it a lot easier, that's for sure. My dad would be disgusted if he saw how we do stuff now.
Of course, the first thing we teach the young planners is that the top of the map is not always north.
Yeah, exactly.
The top of the map is the top of the ski area. Chris, there's so many consulting firms out there that have what I think of as sort of the grand master, the guy who's got his name on the door, that I think all the designers sort of feel like they have to design the way that they want the patriarch of the firm to see it. And that's too heavy of an influence. I've always appreciated, for you, I think the grand master is collaboration. It's collaborating with the client. It's collaborating with our team, whether it's younger people on the team. It's collaborating with like we talked about before, the men and women that are running the place. It might be the ski school directors just got an amazing idea for a chairlift alignment or something they could do for their part of their kids program. And I think you do an amazing job of finding that collaboration and influencing, like just catalyzing that collaboration, and then obviously reducing it to the plan. And that's the hard part, is to distill all the ideas and all the conversations down to something that's ultimately goes on a plan and works. It's incredible how you've been able to sort of develop that expertise.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I really appreciate that. It's it's experience. It's all about experience and showing up and doing, listening to people and people have good ideas. People and like you say, it's a matter of recognizing good ideas and not letting your ego get in the way of moving a good idea forward or incorporating it into what we're doing. And it's just important, it all comes down to, you just want it to be, you want to have that experience of skiing down the run and seeing happy people and people. And it's a matter of recognizing that, it's not just my ideas that make that happen. It's the whole team. Right. And I think that's, thanks for pointing that out, because I think it is something that am somewhat proud of, is that, I do really appreciate the input from others and recognize the influence it has on the stuff that we as a company present to our clients and that they present to their guests.
I always think about I think the greatest assets that we as a company have. We're kind of a knowledge clearinghouse of just resorts, because we've seen so many resorts. You've seen hundreds and hundreds of resorts. You've walked through hundreds of rental rooms and seen the ones that work really, really well. And then you step into one that, the flow's not right, or it's too small over here. And that is the value of what we bring, is just literally we've seen 100 rental rooms.
Right.
And there's no one else in the industry that's been able to have that opportunity to go around and see 100 rental rooms or 100 retail situations at a ski area, base area, kitchen scrambles and layouts, or where to put the cash registers, just those simple things that we get the chance to see at so many different resorts.
Yeah.
It's such a fun part of the business.
It really is, the different influences or inputs that we get and how it shapes what we do. One of the things that was, I kind of suspected that one of the things we might talk about is one of the worst resorts or one of the worst projects I ever worked on. What was the most challenging thing? And was kind of thinking about that. And I think that there's kind of a story here that, it's all fun. It's all so much fun. When it gets challenging is when you get big egos involved. And in the ski industry, that's not all that uncommon. But the one project that we had the biggest ego I've ever encountered was actually what Tamarack was formerly known as Valbois, or Le Bois before that. And the guy that was behind the project, forwarding the project, was a French guy named Pierre Schneblin. And he had the biggest ego I have ever seen anywhere. And to a certain degree justified. He developed resorts in the French Alps and had some very good successes under his belt. And so, somewhat legitimate, but he, and I was working with Tim Beck at the time, and he was really like pushing us to do all these things to make Valbois or Tamarack more like a French resort. And we're just like, no, it doesn't work. There's trees here. In Val Thorens, there's no trees, so it's a different deal. And he said, no, we need to have a skier boulevard. We must have the skier boulevard. And I was like, what's that? And he was like adamant about this thing that we had to have the skier boulevard. And it's a way of people understanding how to get around the mountain. It's kind of the central street. And I was like, well, this mountain isn't that complicated. And anyway, eventually we got him off of the skier boulevard thing. And we're doing this project last week in China. And it's a big, big, big mountain, bunch of peaks, valleys, and all this kind of thing. It's kind of confusing. And I was like, you know what? We need a skier boulevard. And we have it. It's on the maps that we sent out yesterday. There's a route that like connects all the lifts and all the peaks and stuff, so that, you know, if a person is lost, they just go to the skier boulevard and they can get home. And so, you know, it's like, yeah, this guy who I didn't particularly like very much 40 years ago or 35 years ago taught me something that I would put it, you know, apply. So it's like, it's just really fascinating where these things come
Back to
from.
that perspective thing, right?
Yeah.
You never know where it's going to pop up. And all right. So Chris, you've been out just arcing the big ones all day long, having a great time with a group of friends. What's your favorite thing to do after skiing?
That's easy. Have a beer.
That's good.
Maybe some chips, but beer is key.
Chris, this was super fun to sit down and just take an hour and talk about some of the memories we had together and celebrate your huge career, 40 years. Thanks for your time to do this.
Yeah. No, thank you, Ken. This has been a blast. I really love, you don't have many opportunities to talk stories like this, and there's always so much going on. But look, dude, you have been the most solid partner and friend I've had through this career. And I feel so fortunate to have you leading our company and being able to work with you and have these fun times together and stories. So I really, really appreciate that.
It's absolutely mutual, my friend.
Right on.
Let's go get some beers and we can do this for another hour.
Yeah.